Good afternoon, everyone. So welcome to this session on Micro-Frontends discovery. Let me start with a quick survey. So raise your hand if you have ever deployed in your career a line of code in production. Okay, keep your hands up. Keep your hands up, please. Thanks. Now, second question. How many of you have rollback code in production? Okay, so now look around the room. It's a problem that is affecting everyone. Okay, so it's something that is extremely common in whatever job you do and inside your career that you do this kind of, let's say, you have these kind of challenges to face. Now, let's face how we can tackle this problem. As you can see, I'm not a great designer. That's the first thing I can tell you. I'm not the great designer, but this is a website that is using Micro-Frontends, using module federation behind the scene. We will drill down into that. And let's imagine for a second the dream. So I have an API somewhere in the cloud, maybe, where I can say, oh, you know what? I need to deploy it version 2, and I need to deploy it incrementally. Okay, so now if everything goes well, and I did my homework, I should see here, elsewhere. Yeah, perfect. Now, if you want to follow me in this rabbit hole, you will see here that from now on, that website that you can reach from that link will change during this talk. Magic. It's no magic. It's just applying good engineering practices. And I encourage you during this session to, let's say, refresh your browser and see in which bucket you fall. You fall into the new version or the old version, when you become in the new version, and so on and so forth. Nice to meet you, everyone. My name is Luca. I'm a serverless specialist, solution architect. I work for AWS, and I'm an international speaker. I had the pleasure to be on the stage from Japan to Silicon Valley, delivering keynotes or talks. I'm a published author, 2 books. I'm writing the 3rd one, just because I love being part of the community and contribute to the community. Okay, so today we are going to talk classic things, right? So when we have like a front-end application, what happens 99% of the time, let's pick a single page application, is that a team or multiple teams of developers are working on an application, and then they deploy in production, they create an artifact, heavily optimized, tree-shaked, and minification and everything. You know better than me. And then you deploy in production, the user consume that. Happy days. What happens when we move into the world of Micro-Frontends? Micro-Frontends is different, right? It's a distributed system, like you have for microservices. If you have a microservice architecture, it's very likely that you could benefit from the idea of Micro-Frontends. So the idea of creating some portion of the system that is assigned to a team for building end-to-end their APIs and front-end and deploy independently from the rest is not a dream anymore. It's doable, and there are several companies doing that. But they face at a certain point this challenge: how can I deploy in production? And the reality is, it doesn't have to be painful. Vast majority of the time, what I've seen is that people embracing Micro-Frontends, they do what they were doing with single-page application. They do a big bang deployment. Now, I'm not against big bang deployment. I did that. I'm guilty for several years. But there are better ways that we can improve our, let's say, deployment process, and also make it simpler. The thing, so in, when was that? December 2021, I have usually a couple of weeks that I'm taking off for the Christmas break, also because I don't do many holidays, because I'm lazy and I love what I'm doing. And for the last few weeks of the year, usually I start to think about, let's say, big topics, like how can I help the Microfrontend community? And one thing that I realized during that time was we are lacking of a way to discover Microfrontends. Because imagine that you have like a web page that is split in multiple, a web application that is split in multiple Microfrontends, so multiple chunks. At some point, I need to know where I can load that Microfrontend, right? Or where it is, where this Microfrontend. And we were lacking a solution for doing that as a community. So I started to engage with few people in the community and trying to figure out how can we solve this problem. First thing that I did is saying, okay, so let's think about static and dynamic import. 99% of the time, if you go on the web and you see tutorial, blog post, or whatever, you see something like that. I pick single SPA because it's one of the most popular framework. Is available since when was that? 2015, if I remember well. 2016 is used widely for creating single-page applications, so client-side rendering applications. So as you can see, if I want to split my web application in multiple micro-frontends, they're using a standard like import map for, let's say, having all the different chunks that are loaded. And for the next page, you are going to have another list of, let's say, JavaScript file. But this is static. How many of you are working with a multi-environment strategy? You have like pre-prod, production, I don't know, staging, testing, or gamma, alpha, beta, theta, whatever, right? That doesn't scale. So if we check another approach, this is Module Federation. Module Federation is a plugin for Webpack that revolutionized the way how we are thinking about front-end. So now we can remotely fetch a specific chunk that's called remote entry. The remote entry is nothing more than a map that is saying, okay, for this specific micro-frontend, I have to load this chunk of JavaScript, this chunk of JavaScript, this chunk of JavaScript, and so on. And in this case, I can use, as you can see here, up_02, like a normal, let's say, component in React, for instance. So I just do the import, and I use it, and I work normally without any problem. But also in this case, again, we have localhost, we have, let's say, pointing to a specific thing. Therefore, I need to create multiple Webpack configuration in order to work with that. But what about dynamic import? Do we have a way for having an application shell that contains basically, that is loaded at the beginning of the experience of a website and allows me to load just a portion of the website without caring about the rest, but I need to know which version it is, where I can find this portion, is it in which environment I'm working, and so on and so forth. So one thing that you need to know, I'm extremely passionate about architecture. Design patterns, stuff like that. I know I'm awkward. I know that, but it's one thing that I really liked. And when I was thinking about how to solve the problem, I would say, okay, let's try to see in distributed system like microservices that is there for 20 years how they're going to solve that. And the service discovery pattern, it was crystalline clear, right? So you have like now a service registry. Every time that I create a new microservice, I basically subscribe or add my credential into the service registry. So next time that someone is calls the service registry, and I don't have to call directly the IP. So if I change the IP, I change maybe from an API gateway to a load balancer, or I change the architecture, it doesn't matter, because how you are going to call from the gateway to the service is stored inside the service registry. Fantastic. So now I can evolve my architecture, because evolutionary architecture is a key here. For instance, order, I change whatever I need. I store how to call it inside the service registry. The gateway is going to call me. Perfect. Top on. But there are other challenges. Common challenges when this, let's say, potential pattern could help us is discovering new version. How do I know that there is a new version of a micro-frontend in this case? And maybe I want also to de-risk the deployment. You all raise your hand because you were doing rollbacks. Do we need to do rollbacks? Why we're not creating a healthy feedback loop for developers and a safe net for developers that they can roll forward? They can redeploy without affecting entirely the user base that are consuming that website. And the other thing that I thought there was a good perk is, what if I want to use a multi-CDN strategy? And I want to load JavaScript not only from my primary CDN, but as a failover, if the CDN is down, I can go to another place. Before we move on, when I talk about de-risking the deployment, I need to explain what blue-green and canary release are. So blue-green deployment is a very simple concept that we use for ages. The idea is probably any, let's say, load balancer that you're using allows you to do that. So I have a website. Currently, I have version 1.2.1. 100% of the traffic, live traffic is there. And then the developer says, okay, I have a new version 1.4. and we deploy in production, and then they can start to test it. They test exactly that specific version in production, because we all know that despite our effort to make pre-prod identical to production, difficult. And sometimes you cannot even do that. And I was in a company like that you can test only in production. And then when you are happy, maybe it's the QA, maybe it's the developer, what you do is say, okay, so let's shift 100% of the traffic towards the new version. Now, if I need to roll back, it's just shifting the traffic. Again, I don't have to redeploy anything. I don't have rollback. I don't have anything. On the other side, I have personally my favorite way for releasing software, that is canary releases. So I can say I add version 1.2.1, and then suddenly I have version 1.0. And version 1.0 now, I just give a bit of ease, like 33% of the traffic goes there, the rest is going to the old version. So if I see that there isn't any alarm that is triggered by my dashboards, yeah, probably I'm in a good shape for, let's say, moving more target. If there is an alarm, I can go back, I impacted just a tiny bit of my live traffic, I discover that there is a problem, and then I can fix it, redeploy, and start again. But this problem, as I said, is a problem that everyone has. And I'm a strong believer in community. So what I did that year is calling the people that I know and I work with in the community for creating this idea of Micro-Frontends. So Joel Denning is the creator of Single SPA. Matteo Figus is a colleague of mine working in AWS, but before was working in OpenTable. He created Open Component Framework that is one of the first let's say, Microfrontends framework that was out there. And Zach Jackson is the creator of Module Federation. And with this brain power, we thought that was good enough to start to explore this problem. So we agreed on the problem space. What you have seen that is the real problem that everyone has, and every single company is trying to solve in their own way. That for me is extremely fascinating. And I spoke with hundreds of teams in the last 3 years since when I joined AWS. And every single time the teams reach a maturity level that they require to, let's say, implement these things, and they implement every single time in a different way when they can. So the first question that we ask ourselves, how can we implement the feature that I described to you inside an application shell in an easy way? Because the reality, let's make it clear. Very often we see, let's say, solution out there that force us to stop the development, update a cluster, updating a controller of a service, wherever it is, and then we need a very opinionated solution that solves, let's say, 100% of our problems, maybe not 100, maybe 99, but still requires an effort that we need to squeeze inside our development lifecycle. And to be honest, in the past, I was for 15 years an engineer, principal engineer, whatever, and it was extremely annoying. So what is the currency that we have in JavaScript that we can use for having the most simple thing to implement this stuff? A JSON schema. We parse JSON for basically the second that we are writing the first line of code in JavaScript to when we render something. So let's try to see what we have here. So first and foremost, we need to create a unique identifier. So in this case, we have at AWS project is the name of our project. Then we have catalog, that is the name of the Micro-Frontend. And then we have the URL where I can find my Micro-Frontend. As I said, fallback. Pretty good one that if I need to fall back in any way, could be, let's say, static file that I want to load and show just, let's say, static data, or it could be, let's say, in another CDN, up to you to decide how it works. Then we thought we should do some, let's say, we should provide some metadata by default, like integrity in this case, if you want to do any check there, the version, extremely useful in debugging mode. And then these extras took roughly 4 months to be decided, because we started to we went in a rabbit hole where we started to say, oh yes, Module Federation has this need, Pyrrole has that need, and Single SPA has this other need, and we weren't finding a decent way for mapping all the different use cases. And the other thing is I was saying, yes, but then you have to think that someone wants maybe to deploy a new version of Micro-Frontend for just the VIP users or admin users or whatever. And someone else maybe wants to do per region. So these things has to be, let's say, taken into account. So the first version of the JSON schema, we decided to use extras. So module federation, for instance, Zach proposed, I want to load my remote entry, that is my map with all the files, but I can specify into consume by all the other files that I need to load. So instead of having a waterfall in our Chrome DevTools, and when we are, let's say, in our networking tab, we are going to have everything in parallel, because we can leverage now HTTP 2 and HTTP 3, so we don't have to wait and be bounded to 10 socket connection towards a server. So great. So we solved in this way the first part. Okay, now we move to the interesting part. How do we introduce blue-green deployment canary release? Because everyone agreed, every single of us, despite the geography where we were based. I was based in London, Zach in Seattle, Joel is in Denver, if I remember well, and Matteo is here in London. Every single of us has to deal with that because we were working either in a core team or in a platform team, and we had to serve other teams to build faster what they need. But if developers don't have a safe net, is a problem. So one thing I didn't mention is that every single Micro-Frontend is described as an array that lead us that we can have multiple Micro-Frontends. So same ID, but I have this array. Now I have a deployment that is optional inside the schema, deployment object that basically tells me what I want to do. Traffic 30% to this one, and the other one on the bottom is 70%. That is absolutely great. We've thought to have a default, but I think we changed our mind after a while. For now, in version 1, there is this default idea. So for instance, we cannot fetch that specific Micro-Frontend, despite is, let's say, listed here, we can always fall back into a default. So that basically is the second level of fallback that you can have. And to be honest, you can think, okay, so these guys spend like a month defining the schema, but no one has that in production. It's not completely true. So back in the days, I was customer of AWS. I was VP of architecture for a company called DAZN, that is a live sports streaming platform. We were doing that at the edge. We didn't have the schema. There wasn't module federation. There weren't all the other stuff. What we were doing was exactly that. We were doing canary release at the edge, where we were just describing in a JSON file how we wanted to deploy our Micro-Frontends. We could say, developers could say, I want to deploy this new version in Switzerland, because it was the smallest country we had. And I want to deploy at this time. I wanted to deploy only for Chrome, and I want 5% of the traffic. And what happened for me was pure magic. At that time, I expected that the feedback loop was extremely good. But what I wanted really is moving away from the idea of rolling back. Because rolling back is for me, is a problem because it's not creating a healthy behavior inside the company. It's just a signal. What I wanted to do is that they try, they fix it, and they move forward, because we can create a completely different way for handling our software. And in fact, we moved from 3-4 deployment per month to 25 per day. That was the first week. And we started to have like thousands of deployment every month. And that app then was rolled out also on microservices layer and so on and so forth. That's what I wanted to see. So benefits of this approach. First of all, let's say that it works also on the front end, not only on the back end. You don't have to, let's say, use, let's say, always a service to provide the information that you have seen inside the schema. Potentially, you can have like a static file that is available there. There is a caveat though. So it was funny because it was literally, I think it was like right after Christmas, was 26th of December of 2021. And I pitched this idea to the principal engineer in the zone because he's a good friend of mine. I said, listen, Max, I was thinking to do this thing. And then like 1 hour later, he sent me this picture. So I had to like to put here. I understand like half, probably less of what he did. But the let's say what the key part is that if to a certain percentage, when you arrive to have enough clients that are using your system, you get closer to split the traffic in a canary release fashion. And the idea is like pretty good. So we can use also on the front end. So thanks, Max, for the help. The other thing is it's not very opinionated. It's JSON at the end. Everyone can write JSON, right? So you can use for that. Oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you, the beauty of this approach is that it doesn't work only for Microfrontends. If you have a single SPA, if you have an SPA today, you can potentially do exactly the same thing on the edge, because the reality is it's a JSON. So you can say certain percentage of traffic goes to this version of my single page application and the rest on the old one. And then you always have this mechanism. It's extensible. The problem I have, that is the next bullet point, if I remember, yes, is that every time that you have today a single page application, first thing that you do is loading a configuration. It's like I did that for 15 years. Every time I have like a client-side thing, the first thing you do is a call to the server, give me this configuration. A call to a static JSON, give me this configuration. So I didn't want, for the principle that I described before, to have something opinionated that forces you to have bad performances. Why not? It's JSON. You can integrate in an existing API that you have. The only thing that you need to do is just squeezing in a chunk of JSON. That's it. Pitfalls of this solution, obviously, we need to see, in architecture, is always a trade-off. So first of all, you must get this configuration before you load anything. There are techniques that I've explored in the past, like Netflix, for instance. I don't know if it's still like that, but when I was in my previous company, when I was analyzing how they were saving time for deploying their application, they are taking the JSON file related to your user data, and they are squeezing inside the HTML. So if you inspect HTML, you see your email in clear, you see the account number in clear and everything. And that basically saved them a call or multiple calls. I don't know how they structure that thing, but it's very interesting. The other thing that we were questioning, there was a discussion that took like a couple of sessions that we were running, and it probably is too loose. We are not providing too many information, right? So we need to be more prescriptive. And there was some debate. I'm a bit on the fence on that, because being opinionated without understanding how the customers would use this solution is a problem. So for security performance reason, obviously we all agreed that the best way to implement that is not with a static JSON file, it's with a service, right? So, but we made it. So it's available on AWS Labs. And you have like in this repo, you have your schema. You can contribute to the schema. You can open an issue. You can comment. You can ask for stuff. So it's there. So it's been a year and something that is there. And I'm very happy with that. The other cool thing that when we released that, now the rest of the community that they're creating meta framework or framework around Micro-Frontends, they started to embrace that. And that's the main reason why I wanted to do that publicly. I wanted that the community started to really feel that this is the direction of travel that we need to take, because everyone started to implement. So for instance, if you're using Pyral, that is another meta framework that you can use with Micro-Frontends, you have that implemented out of the box. So you just need to use Pyral, and you will be able to have the let's say deployment as described, discoverability as described. Me and Florian are good friends. I met him like 2 years ago in Munich, and we discussed how to implement that. It's very cool. Now, the other problem I have, because again, I said I want to facilitate the community. So how can we facilitate the adoption? So passion about architecture. Therefore, I started to say, okay, let's design a sequence diagram. So the sequence diagram works like that. So I have an application shell, or it could be on the client, on the server, it doesn't matter. Then I request to a hypothetical service this Microfrontends discovery to give me the Microfrontends version I need to load that are available to me. I retrieve from the database this information in the JSON, and then I go through every single of them, checking, do you want in canary release, do you want without canary release, and so on and so forth, right? But then looking into this, I said, okay, so perfect. It works with client-side rendering. It works with server-side rendering. It doesn't really matter the framework. It doesn't really matter the technology. So this chunk here is what we call in AWS undifferentiating heavy lifting. You can just build once, everyone will benefit. And therefore, what I said to a bunch of colleagues of mine, let's build it. And it's available there, completely open source. You can go there, you can deploy in your AWS account if you have one, you can copy the code and let's say change it, do wherever, but it's there. There are quite a few customers currently that are using that. I'm supporting them, and is basically extremely easy because you deploy your in AWS account and you just use it. You plug it to your existing CI/CD, to your existing Micro-Frontends implementation. Why that? Because when I was thinking about that, I want that this kind of solution are transparent. I don't want to have design that are invasive. So we built everything with serverless for one main reason, because you pay for what you use. So when I think about multi-environment strategy, one benefit that we had in my previous company is that half of our infrastructure was serverless. So pre-prod and development and all the other environments that weren't prod, if I have the developers that are in the weekend and enjoying their families, we don't pay. Great stuff. And that helped a lot. The other thing is because this one is extremely, let's say, fast to build. So this part is what we call the back office. It's despite it seems very complicated, it is not. So the thing that you care about is that we have an admin API entry point that is the one that you are going to use for plugging into your CI/CD. So imagine that today you are taking your static files and deploying to an S3 bucket or wherever. Then you call this admin API. That is the API that I call at the beginning. So if you refresh now the browser, probably you will see a new version of the application. The call basically is storing some information across multiple DynamoDB tables. At the beginning, we were thinking, oh yeah, we could have just one DynamoDB table, but the reality is we want to heavily optimize for traffic. We have customers that have like millions of requests every single minute into a website. So we need to heavily optimize the way how we are reading this store. And therefore, we started to, let's say, have like all the data in multiple tables so we can use that stream lambda that you can see there for heavily optimize the design of the schema. And in order to implement canary release and everything, we said, okay, so let's use another serverless solution. Step functions is an orchestrator, but allows us to deal with the concept of time. I can, let's say, every time that I say for every minute I want to increase 10%, I just need to use step function that natively, because it's implementing all the AWS SDK, is integrating with one of the table over there and bumping up the amount of traffic that we need to send. And that will basically trigger the Lambda function that store in the client side or the front-facing APIs, let's say, version that you want to have of your Microfrontend. In fact, what we did for being compliant with the way how, let's say, we are doing everything in AWS is using exactly the same approach. So if you're using this canary release and blue-green deployment in AWS today for your Lambda functions or for step function, whatever, you have exactly the same strings. Those basically are telling you that you can have a canary release or blue-green deployment. You tell you the interval for where you can start to have, let's say, the different increase for traffic, and obviously you can also stop them at any given point. You have an API to say, okay, I saw that there are a problem in this deployment, so let's stop it. We added also, and that was mainly me on my experience, also to have an all at once. It's mainly because when I was working in my previous company, we were doing live sport. And when imagine that you are watching like the Champions League final and you have a downtime of, let's say, 3 minutes in the middle of the match. Okay, every minute I was sweating. And I was on call for 6 years, so probably you can relate the problem. And therefore, we created some mechanisms to bypass all the madness of building or whatever, and we just go straight to production because it's already broken, so it cannot go worse than that. And that saved our life several times. So we added also all at once. That is a classic big bang deployment. Okay, so The cool thing of this approach is that, first of all, deploy with one click. If you're an AWS customer or you have an AWS account, click the button that is available in the GitHub repo, and we deploy everything for you. You just need to create an account, a user, in Cognito, and then you can start to use the API. It works with every front-end architecture. It doesn't matter if tomorrow there will be a new architecture, because this is like the most basic thing. Unless we are going to change JSON tomorrow, that I don't believe for a second, it's going to work. It integrates with every CI/CD, because the other thing for me is important is that CI/CD, unfortunately, is, and the automation in general, is often either an afterthought or something that everyone feels the pain when you need to make a change, because it's affecting every single team in a company. So what if I don't have to affect any team? What if I can have just an API that I can use through a vget or a curl, and I call that specific endpoint, and I will enable, let's say, the developers to do a deployment. It's technology agnostic. It reduces definitely blast radius for deploying new version. Now I can have like a way with my dashboards to check that if what I'm deploying does creating more harm than benefit, and I can roll back, or better, roll forward. It's open source. You want to change it, do that. The other thing is it will be embraced by other tools. As I said, Pyral started to embrace that, so happy days. Now, if we check that if it is deployed, okay, I'm here. Yay, we have the new version available, right? And slowly but steadily, basically, it did the deployment behind the scene. That's great. So now let's go back for a second to the slide. Now, how do we implement in client-side rendering this stuff? The logic is very simple. I have the application shell that is calling the discovery service. The discovery service is returning a JSON file or is a part of an API. And then I can start to say, I want 90% this version, I want 10% the other version. Happy days. This is super easy. Let's see code-wise what means. So first and foremost, what I did for proving that it's not very invasive is taking the examples from the repositories of Module Federation, Single SPA, stuff that you can, let's say, find today, and it's not written by me and didn't do anything magic. Created tiny library that has it's called Microfrontend Discovery. I can inject an endpoint, and that mainly because I wanted to, let's say, give the possibility also to have like JSON and other stuff. This is the example that you have in Module Federation. It's exactly the same thing, not changing anything. The code is the same. The only thing is that I did is passing the ID of the Microfrontend that is needed to be loaded, and I retrieve the configuration from the discovery service that in the meantime, behind the scene, fetch the JSON and start to create a value object. So as you can imagine, I'm old enough to have deal with the value objects concept. And I have started to have like a Microfrontend config entry point, the scope. These three elements are exactly the same thing you find. You have to set in Webpack in the configuration or dynamically when you're using Webpack. In the new Webpack 2 that was released last week, you have exactly the same thing. It doesn't change anything. So you set where to find the scope of the module, because you can have, let's say, multiple scope inside the same application. That is pretty cool. And then, yes, then it works, as you have seen. In single SPA is slightly more complicated because we have the beauty of an import map that is an element inside the DOM. It's not something I can manipulate in JavaScript in memory, but I need to fetch from the DOM. So in this case, what I did is exactly the same thing. Library works for both. So then I retrieve the list of all Microfrontends. Great. Then I need to take the import map and taking the existing one and augmenting it with additional, let's say, with additional Microfrontends that I loaded from my discovery service. As you can see here, let's say, we had like a bunch of APIs that Joel created for dealing with import maps dynamically through JSON objects. So we just create the same structure that, let's say, the single SPA use for augmenting the import map. And then with important things, because they didn't work at the beginning, you need to reappend into the head. That basically will trigger the browser because it's a new element, it's considered a new element inside the DOM, and they will trigger to load the JavaScript file that you express there and load it. Apart from that, you forget that you have Micro-Frontends, because from that moment on, when you have that, it works with every page and everything else. Yeah, append to add. Now, the append to add, just to show you how it works, is that retrieving the different, let's say, element that were in the original script, because you need to load a bunch of JavaScript in order to make it work. Then you append the different new DOM elements, and you just, let's say, append into that. That's basically what it does. Nothing too magic, as I described, pretty easy. Now, let's go to the tough part. Server-side rendering is something that in the Microfrontends community we didn't solve yet at the level that I would like to be solved. I mean, you can do Next.js, you can apply multiple DNS, splitting your architecture in that way. Totally doable, nothing against that. But I'm always asking myself, can we do something better? Okay, so this is a classic thing that I was talking also with someone here in the audience about the approach that they took for creating Microfrontend. That is similar to this. And what you have like is classic CDN. You have a bunch of static files because if you're not familiar with server-side rendering, you usually do all the rendering, the first rendering on the server, but then you need to give JavaScript the possibility to click the button or interaction in general, and therefore you do the part that's called hydration, and you need to have some JavaScript that is stored somewhere and served to the browser. Okay, from that point, what you have is that you have what is called the UI composer or application shell. But the UI composer thing makes more sense to me because in reality, you are going to have Microfrontends that are represented by containers, by Lambda functions, wherever it is. That depends which approach you are taking. In this, for instance, example, I was using HTML fragments. Why that? Because HTML fragments are independent from the framework. We can coordinate the framework about that, but it's very easy to manipulate that because HTML at the end is XML. And in JavaScript, we are used to deal with XML without any problem. So what it means is that if I have like the review Microfrontend or the product details Microfrontend, I can easily making a request, receiving some HTML fragments and positioning them into the page in the position that I want. Happy days. Now, the problem I had at this stage is the one that we were discussing, because here is even more prominent, because we are on the server side, and maybe today I'm using a Lambda function, tomorrow I'm using Kubernetes, in 6 months' time I will going to use step functions. Who knows? We need to create architectures that are evolutionary, and therefore we need to think in the key parts of the architecture, there aren't many, how to decouple important parts. So in this case, the UI composer didn't call straight the Microfrontends. But what it does is literally calling the Microfrontends discovery. What the Microfrontends discovery does is what we have seen so far. So I just say, I need the catalog. I don't know which version. Tell me which version. And it's going to Microfrontend discovery saying, this is where you can find it. And this is the version that you need to handle. And the beauty of that is that now, if tomorrow I can remove that, I will deregister inside the Microfrontend discovery my Microfrontend. Microfrontend doesn't exist anymore. I can create like failure that are gracefully failure on the UI if the Microfrontend is not that important. So I can really think of my system holistically in a way that is easy to deal with. Obviously, the theory is always defeated by practice. In this case, it's not. So what I did is I wrote a blog series and I created an example that does exactly that. In this example, I was using System Manager for the discovery service because we were still building the discovery service, but you can replace with the discovery service like this, no problem. So if you're interested, you can find not only the article, but also the code repository that is available on our GitHub repo in AWS. And here you can easily, let's say, try, as you can see here, AWS samples GitHub repo. You can try what I've done. I have used a bunch of serverless services. I'm using Fargate. I'm using streaming for let's say, for the final page. That is pretty cool with Micro-Frontends, because imagine that you have, let's go back for a second here. Imagine that, for instance, the review Microfrontend is hanging because the database is low, whatever it is, but the product details is available. I can start to send from the UI Composer in streaming fashion to the browser that starts to render a portion of the page, and then when the other is ready, it will be ready. I can create threshold on a specific Microfrontend response time in order to have, let's say, the deployment or removing that specific Microfrontend from the UI. So I have a lot of, let's say, knobs to use this approach in the way that I want. Okay, so let's try to recap. First of all, a discoverability pattern unleashes quite a lot of new opportunities. And I believe that this approach will help you in several ways. And it's not only for Microfrontends, as I said before. I have currently quite a few customers I'm following worldwide that they are dealing with this approach, and they found very suitable. And I always found interesting when it happened. It's never at the beginning of the project. At the beginning, they need to sort out their architecture. But when they started to be in production, at the basically second release, they started to say, oh, we should do something for trying to do cache busting and doing this and doing that. This is the answer, because you're going to face it no matter what. Improve your discoverability and improve also your deployment strategy. The fact that you can go to your business and say, okay, I have I can stagger my rollout and cannot affect anything. Sometimes for me was the way how we were able to mitigate the reinforcement from the change advisory board or CAB process that we had in the company. Because now the developers, they didn't affect real, let's say, too many users in production. So they can really, let's say, finding a tiny slice of the traffic in production, because we were trying to do live streaming. You cannot do in pre-prod, sorry. But there is one more thing. As I said, community is part of my life and part of my career. So I created a second newsletter that I'm, let's say, the creator of Dear Architects. If someone has subscribed to that architecture newsletter that comes every Saturday night in your inbox, I decided to create another one on Microfrontends. So if you're interested on the topic, I basically share in fortnightly fashion, completely free. I'm not gaining anything. I'm just paying MailerLite for hosting my newsletter, nothing else. You can go there. You can, let's say, subscribe, and you will receive every 2 weeks, let's say, an email with a bunch of resources and thoughts about the Microfrontends community, and how the things are evolving. So the first issue was last week. Next week, there will be a new one. That's all I got. I hope that you enjoyed. And if you have any questions, we still have time for answering them. Thank you very much. We have questions? We have also a mic. If not, cool. So enjoy the rest of the conference then.